One story everyone can cover safely is how much we hate each other. There's no institutional or commercial taboo that story violates. As it turns out, there's a utility in keeping us divided. As people, the more separate we are, the more politically impotent we become.
I made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment.
Going to be the hardest video I've ever had to film.
The issue with cancel culture is it's kind of like this, like you have a cut on your arm, let's just chop the whole arm off.
Make a statement on what I said in my previous live stream.
So YouTube stars are learning the hard way that everything you post online stays there forever.
And the facts are that she was very clearly crushed emotionally and like mentally, and it seemed like, you know, spiritually, professionally, in all ways crushed.
In an intense couple of weeks for everyone. And transition is hard. Transition is difficult. Kind of no matter how you look at it, or no matter how big of a transition in your life, transition is just hard.
I've seen things you people would believe.
The thing that I'm interested in is cancel culture. Now, cancel culture is something that's not new, but the term itself is pretty recent. It's an early 2010s term that basically equates to stopping something that is not considered morally right in the eyes of society. But the practice of it is much deeper and much more rooted in history than it would have you know at first glance. In fact, the idea of mass ending and mass canceling of certain groups of people, places, or things has been around since the dawn of history. One could argue this canceling and this nature of public shaming thy neighbor is actually ingrained into our nature. It's a part of what it is to be human. Since we are pack animals who thrive in societies, we need to go back, very far back, to before the internet was even a thing.
Look at him now! Be crucified!
All of human society has shame to some degree. Depending on whatever society you look at, they had an equivalent for what would be a public shaming. Some of these would be executions, others would be locking a person in a stockade. You've seen them in colonial America, you've seen them as a crucifixion. They've been around for a very long time. Let's think about it. You look back on history and see all these public tortures taking place. Public floggings, stockades, dangling criminals from walls, you name it, they did it back in the day. And all of these seem like cruel, torturous events, but at the time, it was a great social tool, and it had purposes. Now, what would you do if you survived your lashings, if you survived your time in a stockade, if you survived these events? Let's say you weren't put to death by them, you were just held in them for a certain time to be taught a lesson. Well, what do you do after you leave the stockade, after your whipping? Do you just go back to your normal life? Can you go back to your normal life after your friends, neighbors, and family saw you, a criminal, an outcast, be put on display around its society? What would happen to these outcasts? What would happen to the village whore, the town thief, the leper, the homeless? If you would not become something like this, you would die a painful, slow death in some form of public humiliation and execution. You'd be painfully picked apart by birds publicly for the world to see, or you would die of sheer shock and pain from the events you were forced to carry out by a government who said it was okay. Meanwhile, while all this happened, your friends, families, and neighbors could be standing by the side, either weeping or cheering for your damnation. Now, crucifixions are particularly popular, and there's a reason for that. They're incredibly old and incredibly effective. You get to display a criminal publicly and also remove them from your society. It's going to keep people from committing crimes in the future if they see somebody else being tortured in public. Now, we in the West tend to associate crucifixions with the Romans and the crucifixion of Christ. But the practice is actually really, really old. We're talking about as old as the Assyrians and Babylonians. Back then, there wasn't a cross that you'd bear and be nailed to. It didn't happen like that. You'd be tied up, basically feet dangling from a tree or, say, a post. Now, the iconic cross did come about in Roman times, and in fact, many attribute the Romans with perfecting the art of this public execution. In Rome, this practice would be reserved for only the worst of worst criminals. So people like slaves, disgraced soldiers, Christians especially, foreigners, and in particular political activists. You see, part of the reason that Christians were crucified back then, and it was a lot more than just Jesus who were crucified on the cross, was really because at the time Christianity was considered a heretical cult, which meant that Romans were trying to squash that because religions like Christianity would undermine the state. I should also add the Bible doesn't do a particularly good job in explaining how incredibly violent and gruesome it actually is to be crucified. So here's what would happen to you. You would be stripped naked in front of everybody. You'd be tied to a post and then flogged with a whip across your back, butt, and legs. Frequently, the victim fainted during the procedure, and sudden death was not uncommon. The victim was then usually taunted, then forced to carry a patibulum. There we go. It's the crossbars of a cross, tied across his shoulders to the place of execution. Sometimes the Roman soldiers would hurt the victim further, cutting off a body part such as the tongue or blinding him. In another heinous turn, Josephus reported how soldiers under Noctis IV, the Hellenistic Greek king of the Seleucid Empire, would have the victim strangled, child hung around their neck. So imagine you're a criminal with a kid, and they basically gut your child and then use your child's intestines to strangle you to death. Then, of course, after all this torture, if you survived, you would be brought to your place of execution, where you would be affixed on the patibulum. It's a very hard word, excuse me. And then it would be affixed upright in that cross position I'm certain we're all familiar with. Now, you didn't die right after you got up on that cross, by the way, and it tends to happen pretty instantly in, movies that depict the crucifixion. But in reality, the length of time it would take for you to die could be anywhere from a few minutes, a couple hours, to days. And usually, if we're talking days, by that time, the birds have started picking away at your flesh while you're living. Now, this is just in the Western world, but again, we've been publicly shaming people from all walks of life in tons of different societies. Imperial China had their own form of public shaming as well. For centuries in China, criminals would be placed in essentially cages, and they had to wear this rectangular collar and sat in this cage, in a public area in a town, in order to tell passersby that, hey, don't do this crime or you're gonna get that. Usually this would be at city gates to encourage onlookers to not commit crimes as they entered the city. It was a warning to would-be thieves to keep them from, being a thief. In a way, it was to educate onlookers and make them more upstanding citizens of society. Pretty much all of the famous examples of public shaming from colonial America are actually much older than colonial America, and we tend to associate public shamings with America and colonial America, but that's not true. Most of these come from the old world. The idea of the pillory, or, well, what you'd know as like a stockade, came from the old world. And usually the way this would operate is the same that you see in colonial America. People would throw stuff at the person that's locked in the stockade or pillory. They'd harm the person, taunt them, do whatever, as long as they're not stabbing them or shooting them in the face or something. In a way, by taking it and allowing the public to crack their very own metaphorical whip, they were making them a part of the action and teaching them not only through what was happening, but actively making them participants in the act of public shaming. Now, in the Middle Ages, we also had the badge of shame, and what this was usually associated with is with the Jewish people. Yes, the same badge that would be employed by Nazi Germany came from the Middle Ages. In fact, the badge of shame might be one of the oldest forms of a public shaming that could exist if the Bible is to be believed, where Cain killed his brother Abel, and as a result of his actions, God branded him with a mark that would torture him for the rest of his life. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. The mark or badge of shame was meant to separate you from society and make you an outcast, someone other than who was in, marked forever as somebody who committed a wrong. There are countless examples of public shamings through history, tons of really inventive ways of which you could take away a person's respect and pretty much everything about them. For example, Mediterranean men, their body hair was considered very valuable. It was considered very masculine. So to have that taken away was a pretty big deal. In that part of the world, what would happen is you'd have your body hair burned off. But why did these things happen, and who is this really for? Is it just because the people of ancient times are more barbaric and don't understand what it means to treat their fellow man with respect? Are they doing something inherently wrong and evil? Are we better now? Well, let's find out. So Jillian Jordan from Yale University says it's a clue about universal human behavior. Now, this clue is called third-party punishment. The public floggings aren't for the people on the pole. That's not who they're for. They're for the onlooker. Now, you'd be wondering, how is this for the people watching it? They're not being tortured. In fact, sometimes they revel in the ability to torture this person on the pole. Now, scientists argue that this exists for societies to establish normal rules and morals. These events are basically to establish what are the rules of behavior for the society, what's okay and what's not, what's considered socially acceptable and what's not. So theoretically, societies who publicly shame and have these public events like this should perform better, more efficiently, and have less crime than those who do not publicly shame. Now, the public shaming also serves another purpose in this event. Now, when you flog the person, it not only shows you that you yourself are an upstanding individual who beholds the law, but what this actually does is tell other people that you are trustworthy because you won't steal their bread, right? It's showing by you being the authority and cracking that whip that you are on the right side of the whip, and you are the better person for doing so.
I forgot to record this in video, but this video is brought to you by my merch. Yes, videos like this are really hard to produce and require a lot of research. I try to put a lot of work into these so that way you guys can really understand a topic fully and really dedicate my all to stuff like this. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't like to support content like this because it deals with things that are violent or controversial, or any other number of things that they would rather say. However, I think it's a rather important topic. If you'd like to support me in making content like this, and for me to be able to do more things like this in the future, please go and buy some merch. I have a new face mask up, perfect for the summer. It's ice cream themed. We got more stuff coming on the way. I'm sorry if I've been a little bit behind on that. I've been focusing on this and some other projects, but please go pick it up if you haven't. It'll help me out, and you know, the clothes isn't garbage, so you know, wear it.
People look to not only be a part of the in-group, but it's in our evolutionary best interest to align with the ruling party and to align with people who are the in-group. This will not only ensure our survival, but it means that we're protected from other people who might do this in the future. That we are good people and that we are a part of the good people who couldn't do something wrong. Now, this isn't to say that when people do these things, it doesn't mean they don't care about the issue. They might have very real morals that they say, oh, this is why I cracked the whip. But in the back of our brain, in our unconscious mind, we could be saying, oh, I need to be a part of the in-group. I don't want to be set as an outsider, so I will crack the whip. And then your conscious mind interprets that and puts that out as morals. And it happens in such an instant in your brain that you'll never know that maybe, just maybe, you made that tweet to dunk on that racist celebrity, not because you care about it, but because you don't want other people to think you are that. And you can't ever tell because you can't read your unconscious mind. In a way, I'd argue it's in our culture to publicly shame. It's in our DNA even, as a way to ensure that society prospers in a successful manner. Cancel culture is only the latest example of that, and yeah, nobody's being publicly humiliated by being whipped or being stripped naked, but the game's changed a lot since then, and physical violence is frowned upon in modern society. Cancel culture is done under the guise of a moral majority, and that the people that are doing it are committing an act for the rest of us. Now, this is done basically to choose the values of society, which are things that are constantly in flux and change over long periods of time. I'd also argue that being canceled is the equivalent of bearing a metaphorical cross and carrying it up the hill to your new Twitter apology. Much like the time before Twitter and before the internet, being publicly shamed would ruin how you operated in your society. If you weren't murdered on an execution table for something you did, you would essentially become an outcast. And the same goes now, considering the internet is forever. Let's say you say something racist 10 years ago and it comes up now. Well, it might not be who you are now, but that's who you are forever because the internet has seen that and made it public. It forever keeps a person from reintegrating into normal society and becoming a part of the moral majority, because the moral majority wouldn't want that person in there because they were canceled and they don't want to risk it again. Thus, those who are culturally ostracized from the group tend to associate with others who were culturally ostracized rather than change their ways. The internet has allowed us to gather with like-minded peers, and this could allow people to enjoy a show together, but it could also allow people to gather to hate a race together. As a result, the internet has fractured into multiple communities and bubbles that only sometimes butt up against each other as conflicting morals on Twitter, where people will have moral arguments about issues that really don't have a clear-cut answer. The result of this is that outsiders aren't wanted in any community, and outside ideas that go against that culture's normal majority of opinion never gets questioned. As a result of this, you've seen the dawn of the subculture, which I'd argue is a great thing for freedom of expression and the individual, but as a whole, as a society, could allow ideas and other things that are particularly bad for the development of the human race. Ironically, as a result of this, cancel culture is much like the whippings of old, where people aren't able to reintegrate. It's not about reintegration, it's about the whipping. A cancel culture is a modern day way of handicapping someone. You don't need to crack a physical whip to ruin somebody's life. For example, here in the States, punishment is favored over rehabilitation, and people who successfully leave prison and don't commit still suffer repercussions of that crime they committed once in their life. Now, you could argue this is all culturally specific, but history tends to show otherwise, that all of us do this. So what happens? Well, a person's ostracized forever. A person who is considered a racist is forever a racist. A person who is a victim of a false allegation will forever have that on their name. A person who committed an act will forever have that act branded on their record, keeping them from doing things like voting or owning a gun or doing other things that other normal moral majority are allowed to do. Cancel culture, in a way, then, is an answer to the thought crime. Since cruel and unusual punishment has been outlawed, the public carries the torch of receiving and delivering justice to others. For example, if you are removed from Twitter, does anything you say even matter? Twitter's become a public square in recent years where people are allowed to say their piece, but obviously, some people's opinions are more equal than other people's equal opinions. Does your opinion even exist? Do you as a person even exist if you've been banned from Twitter? Do you exist if you were branded as an outcast? Where do you go after becoming an outcast? If you become an outcast, you're gonna go where the other outcasts are, where they're gonna let you say that thing you said that other people said was wrong. And so I'd like to turn our attention to a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and it's a book that looks exclusively at public shamings before I'd say we even entered the golden age of it. And I'd say that the golden age of public shaming started around the Gamergate social movement around like 2014. And that's a video on its own for another day, but let's read a little bit of So You've Been Publicly Shamed, because it'll help you understand what happens when your average Joe becomes the victim of a canceling. So the author of this book, John Ronson, is talking to a judge who carried out a kind of public shaming, like he issued a public shaming for a criminal that he convicted. And I'm just gonna read this conversation he had with the guy. The justice system in the West has a lot of problems, Poe said, but at least there are rules. Poe is the judge. But at least there are rules. You have basic rights as the accused. You have your day in court. You don't have rights when you're accused on the internet. And the consequences are worse. It's worldwide forever. It felt good to see the balance of power shift so that someone like Ted Poe was afraid of people like us. But he wouldn't sentence people to hold a placard for something they hadn't been convicted of. He wouldn't sentence someone for telling a joke that came out badly. The people we were destroying were no longer just people like Jonah, public figures who had committed actual transgressions. They were private individuals who really hadn't done anything much wrong. Ordinary humans were being forced to learn damage control, like corporations that had committed PR disasters. It was very stressful. We are more frightening than you, I said to Poe, feeling quite awed. Poe sat back in his chair satisfied. You are much more frightening, he said. You are much more frightening. This book isn't just a bestseller, it's also a warning of things to come, a warning of a golden age of new public shamings happening in an online public square instead of a physical one. The hostility and escalations of a hostility online are allowing for normal people to lose their jobs, lose their careers, be unable to work in a field that they've tried their entire life to be in. Later in the book, you meet a tech dev named Hank, and Hank was at essentially this kind of programmer convention, and he lost his job for making a joke in a crowd with his friend. So I'll just go and read that, but basically, you know, the guy lost his job and it became a huge, I mean, for lack of a better word, a clusterfuck. So Hank and his buddy made this joke, right? And then as he made the joke, this woman turned around and took a picture. 10 minutes after the photograph was taken, a conference organizer came down the aisle and said to Hank and Alex is his friend, "Can you come with me?" They were taken into an office and told there had been a complaint about sexual comments. The joke they made was essentially about the presenter having a big dongle, right? They were talking about how their laptop or something along those lines had a really weird dongle, and they were equating that dongle with being a big penis, right? Just two dudes in a crowd making a penis joke. And that was that. The incident passed. Hank and Alex were badly shaken up. We're nerdy guys, and confrontation isn't something we handle well. It's not something we're accustomed to. And so they decided to leave the conference early. They were on their way to the airport when they started wondering exactly how the woman sitting in front of them had conveyed her complaint to the conference organizers. They suddenly felt anxious about this. The nightmarish possibility was that it had been communicated in some form of a public tweet. And so with apprehension, they had a look. And then next they show Adria's tweet, which reads, "Not cool, jokes about forking repo in a sexual way and big dongles. Right behind me. #PyCon." A bolt of anxiety shot through Hank. He quickly scanned her replies, and it was nothing much, just the odd congratulations from a few of her 9,209 followers for the, quote, noble way she had, quote, educated the men behind her. He noticed ruefully that a few days earlier, the woman, her name was Adria Richards, had herself tweeted a stupid penis joke. She suggested to a friend that he put socks down his pants to bewilder TSA agents at the airport. Hank relaxed a little. The next day, Adria Richards followed up her tweet with the blog post. "Yesterday, I called out a group of guys at PyCon conference who were not being respectful to the community." She explained the background, how she was a developer evangelist at a successful startup, and that while the men had been giggling about big dongles, the presenter on stage was talking about an initiative to bring more women into the industry. In fact, he just projected onto the screen a photo of a little girl at a tech workshop. "Accountability was important," Adria said. "These guys sitting right behind me felt safe in the crowd. I got that and realized that being anonymous was fueling their behavior. This was known as de-individualization. Theories of Okay, here Adria was quoting Wikipedia. That is, it's a psychological state of decreased self-evaluation and decreased evaluation of apprehension causing the abnormal the individualization theory Okay, so she's basically going on here to read off of what she took from Wikipedia about de-individualization, where, people lose, certain values and characteristics when they're hidden in a crowd. Anyway, Adria said, I stood up slowly, turned around, and took 3 clear photos. There's something about crushing a little kid's dreams that gets me really angry. It takes 3 words to make a difference. That's not cool. Yesterday, the future of programming was on the line, and I made myself heard. But Hank had already been called into his boss's office and fired. And this is one of those events that really gets me, because the event is not really all that necessary to have needed to happen. If Adria really had wanted to make a difference, she could have just gone up to those men and said, hey, that wasn't a good thing to do. That was a bad joke to make. I don't appreciate that. And said, hey, let's make sure that we be appropriate when somebody's talking about something serious. That's all you needed to do. But instead, Adria took it to Twitter in order to get self-congratulations from her peers, who were all just as trustworthy and engaged in the flogging as well. As a result, Hank had lost his job, and, that's not good, considering Hank is a dad and has kids to take care of. Now, what happens in this story tends to muddy the waters even more, because John Ronson goes and talks to Adria Richards, and I want to tell you, right, that cancel culture, it goes both ways, and that there's a danger associated with being the canceller. So we'll get to that right now. He posted a short message on the discussion board, Hacker News. Hi, I'm the guy who made a comment about big dongles. First, I'd like to say I'm sorry. I really did not mean to offend anyone, and I really do regret the comment and how it made Adria feel. She had every right to report me to the staff, and I defend her position, but as a result of the pictures she took, I was let go from my job today, which sucks because I have 3 kids and I really liked my job. She gave me no warning, she smiled like she snapped a pic, and sealed my fate. The next day, Hank said, Adria Richards called my company asking them to ask me to remove the portion of my apology that stated I lost my job as a result of her tweet. Anyway, John talks about how he goes about getting an interview with Adria, right? And basically how they're going to meet in an airport and talk about what happened from her perspective. And here's what John had to say. She didn't seem fierce at all. She seemed introverted and delicate, just like how Hank had come across over Google Hangouts. We found a cafe. She told me about the moment it all began for her, the moment she overheard the comment about the big dongle. Have you ever heard an altercation at school and you could just feel the hairs raise up on your back, she asked me. You felt fear, I asked. Danger, she said. Clearly my body was telling me, you are unsafe. Which was why, she said, she slowly stood up, rotated from my hips, and took 3 photos. She tweeted one, with a very brief summary of what they said. Then I sent another tweet describing my location, right? And then the 3rd tweet was a conference code of conduct. Danger, I said. You are imagining might... Have you ever heard that thing? Men are afraid that women will laugh at them, and women are afraid that men will kill them, she said. I told Adria that people might consider that an overblown thing to say. She had, after all, been in the middle of a tech conference with 800 bystanders. Sure, Adria replied, and those people would probably be white and they would probably be male. This seems like a weak gambit. Men can sometimes be correct. There is some Latin for this kind of logical fallacy. It's called an ad hominem attack. When someone can't defend a criticism against them, they change the subject by attacking the criticizer. Somebody getting fired is pretty bad, I said. I know you didn't call for that, for him to be fired, but you must have felt pretty bad. Not too bad, she said. She thought back more and shook her head decisively. He's a white male. I'm a black Jewish female. He was saying things that could be inferred as offensive to me, sitting in front of him. I do have empathy for him, but it only goes so far. If he had Down syndrome and he had accidentally pushed someone off a subway, that would be different. I've seen things where people are like, Adria, didn't you know what she was doing by tweeting this? Yes, I did. Obviously, because of what happened at this event, there was a bit of a backlash, and as a result, Adria ended up losing her job, and she essentially got a bunch of hackers on her butt for what she had been saying and doing and acting so smug about this event, saying how it was okay for her to do what she did. Right, so at the same time Hank was being feted and then insulted by men's rights bloggers, Adria discovered she was getting discussed on a famous meeting place for trolls, 4chan. Someone sent Adria a photograph of a beheaded woman with tape over her mouth. Adria's face was superimposed onto the bodies of porn actors. Websites were created to teach people how to make superimposing seamless by matching skin tones. On Facebook, someone wrote, "I hope I can find Adria, kidnap her, put her in a torture bag over her head, and shoot her with a 22 subatomic round right through her skull." I can't read some of this. I can't actually read some of this. It's that bad. And so then they found her employer's websites. The servers came under a massive DDoS attack, which caused them to crash. The automated version of one person or even 1,000 sitting at a computer manually pressing refresh relentlessly until the targeted website becomes overpowered and collapses. A group of hackers' attacks would not stop until Adria was fired. Hours later, she was fired. Adria said, "I slept on a couch for most of 2013. She later emailed me. I cried a lot during this time, journaled, and escaped by watching Netflix. How do I feel about losing my job? I didn't expect it. SendGrid, her employers, threw me under the bus. I felt betrayed. I felt abandoned. I felt ashamed. I felt rejected. I felt alone. And thus an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind."
Wow, I'm plugging two things in the same video? Well, considering it's so long, I definitely am. If you guys like to get some long-form support with the channel, you can do so by heading over to my Patreon, patreon.com/FPSDiesel. On there, you'll get exclusive access to, like, new content like this, where patrons got it early. Or you'll get access to, like, different upcoming projects to find out about different things. Like, for example, this year, obviously, because of COVID, no meeting the furries this year, but I would like to do some stuff like that in the future, so you'd get early access to stuff like that and find out about projects and different cultures that I'd like to do. I'd like to cover more stuff like that. Obviously, given some of my previous videos, I can't go to China, but, you know, that's a video for the future. You'd get to see it early, though, on Patreon. Yeah. Also, you get early access to things like my new podcast, which should be happening, like, sometime eventually. But, yeah, you'll get access to a lot of stuff on there. I try to make it worth your while. It's about a cup of coffee a month. Head over there and support FPS Diesel in making stuff that's at least a little better than drama videos.
Now, it's clear that people's opinions tend to matter more if they're more important online. My opinion matters more than you in the comments, and I'm not even going to pretend like that's not the case. It definitely is. I have the check mark on YouTube. I tend to get noticed in comment sections. For example, on Twitter, a blue check mark is a sign not only of you being a real person, but it's also a sign of you being a valid authority. And for some, people believe that getting a blue check mark on Twitter means that you're endorsed by Twitter. As a result, your opinion matters more than others on Twitter. You can have a person removed much easier if you have a check mark. Your opinion is more valid than others' opinions who are valid, but not as valid as yours. Despite what Twitter would claim by allowing everybody a voice, there's a hierarchy and there is a definite difference between the haves and have-nots. Media knows where they stand in this game, and as a result, they're able to push public shamings and cancelings in ways that they could do much more effectively than a normal person. For example, let's look back on when journalists exposed PewDiePie as a neo-Nazi racist. Now, journalists talk and they work together, and the reason I know this is because I've read books about it and I've talked to people that work in this field. They all associate and gather together in either, places like New York City, Boston, or whatever. In fact, many of them do have email groups where they share information together to coordinate stories. In Matt Taibbi's Hate Inc., he talks about how journalists are a very insular group who all talk together and all end up sharing the same opinions because they all hang out together. As a result, the media is able to determine what kind of stories are made. The media can't tell you what to think, but they can tell you what to think about. They tell you what matters. And for that day, it was how PewDiePie as a racist mattered, and why you shouldn't support him and you shouldn't support YouTube. It ends up becoming this way of systematically dividing the good moral side of society and the bad side of society by targeting certain individuals for personal gain, a commodification of canceling. This is a commodification of this, but it's played as serious journalism. And it happens all the way down from the grassroots level where a person can tweet something all the way up to where national news finds out about it. It's an idea called trading up the chain. It's exactly what happened with Adria and Hank. Now, the chain is the method by which a story reaches the juicy headlines and gets all the way to your eyeballs by going through a system of separate blogs all the way up to national news. If you've ever wondered why major news networks all report on the same thing, this is exactly why. It all trades up the train from basically other types of blogs and websites. This is detailed more exclusively in books like Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday, which I'll also recommend and is a big, basically thesis on how this channel works. Basically, the book allows you to understand how a old Shane Dawson video goes from a YouTube channel to a tweet all the way up to the New York Times. What makes it dangerous is that these journalists essentially create a forever existing example of somebody's racism or offensive behavior online. And basically what this allows for is this person never to be reintegrated into society. If anything, it's a tombstone to this person's ability to work in normal life. Even better, it's by an ad-supported company Twitter account with a blue check mark, so their opinion matters. People aren't really particularly fond of journalists right now, but one can't deny the impact that a lot of these stories can have on greater cultural movements. These things create a traceable, permanent stain on someone as a person, as a human being. Apply for a job and they're gonna know of a slur you said a decade ago. Do anything and they'll know about it, because that's how job background searches work now. They go through your social media. Say you support a cause that isn't the cause that's particularly favorable to a company that you're going to apply for. Good luck getting a job. Better yet, what else could be let out by your canceling? Your home address? Good luck living your life when people threaten to kill your family. The news makes it impossible to remove it. It makes you a villain forever, with never updating it to show that you've apologized or moved on or become better. In a way, it's like the brandings of old. It's like a mark of Cain, a permanent badge of shame that you're bad and you can't ever come back. So for example, PewDiePie will always be a racist in the eyes of some. James Charles will always be a predator in the eyes of others. ProJared, a cheater. Let's say what else? Who knows what else? You know exactly, you've been there, you've seen other cancelings in the past. No right to a fair trial means no recourse, no looking at the evidence, no understanding the situation fully before making a decision. Just a tweet made in the heat of the moment, instantly, because that's what you feel. But we talk much more about the people who are directly offensive. But let's say you're an outspoken youth in college who's supporting a cause you believe in very deeply, and as a result, you get fired for that. What about a tweet you made in college, right? What if that's offensive and you go to a new college? Now that college sees your tweet and now you can't get into that college, or people call that college to get you expelled from it. It's happened before. Who would take someone who's getting issued death threats left and right, who's getting issued basically national security threats left and right? Why would they take you? You're a risk to the students and faculty. And as a result, we get to a point where, is your opinion worth your safety? Is your ideals and morals worth risking your life for? And so we come to the end. What does this mean for us? Well, if you're gonna ask me specifically, I see the value of open discussion and free speech becoming a much more taboo thing in the United States. It's already become a highly politicized topic. It seems more on a whole, the Western world is moving towards a more collective approach to society and how we operate, similar to how countries like China operate. By this, I mean of a concept called face, where a person's reputation is much more important than the opinions they hold, so you want to make sure you have a good reputation. Anyone who tries to change the hearts and minds of people will become an outcast, and others, in order to improve their reputation, will flog the outcast, regardless of the opinion that they hold. It ends up becoming false agreeance with the group to survive, not an active, real change in people's opinions, but rather a false one in order for people to protect themselves, their family, and their livelihoods. In America and a lot of other countries, things like free speech are highly valued and greatly a part of the culture. But there's a possibility that it can become the next great undoing by nature of allowing others to speak. Would you even speak out if the risk of speaking out greatly increases the risk of you getting hurt or losing your job? At what point is your opinion worth sacrificing your life for? It won't be illegal to give your opinion. That's not going to happen. I don't see it happening. But there'll be a moral and societal risk to be somebody with an outspoken opinion or feeling on a situation. All that's left will be a facade, a fake facsimile of what it means to speak out and give your mind and talk about social issues. The outcast will be outcast, and we'll all live in our safe little bubbles. Even if we don't agree with each other in public, we'll all agree to just agree, because it's easier that way. I'm FPS Diesel, and you've been canceled.
Maybe we can